Some people say it's all about who you know. But what does it mean to be known? You know, our world is arguably more connected than ever. But at the same time, people are simultaneously feeling more isolated and alone than ever, despite all of the connectivity. So what does it mean to be known? You know, I think in the digital world, being known is similar to the likes or the shares or the followers or the influence that we have. In the physical world, we may think of being known as what we're known for in terms of what we can do, or we're known for what we have, or we're known for what we enjoy. You know, but as I pause and I think about it, I think being known is actually more than just those things. I want to ask you a question. Who knows you the best? Who knows you better than anyone else in the world? You see, not the you that you have to be or pretend to be at work or around certain people, not the person that you want people to think that you are. No, I'm asking you, who knows you the best? Who really knows you? The funny and goofy you, the passionate you, the frustrating you. Who knows you better than anyone else? You see, because I believe there's power in being known. Now, last week we talked about this freedom that we can find in being found by God. But this week we're going to discover that we're not only found by God, but we're also known by God. We're going to focus on Psalm 139 because in Psalm 139 we get to hear David's heart as he reflects on what it means to both be found and known by God. I want to invite you to turn there with me, because in Psalm 139, beginning in verse 1, we see something powerful. David begins with this phrase. He says, "O Lord, you have searched me and you know me." You know, that word searched is actually really interesting to me. You see, that word has its root in kind of this term that talks about winnowing, or this process of separating this wheat from this chaff. In terms, it's separating what's useful and what's good and what's whole from the things that get in the way. So right away, when David is talking about being known by God, he says that God knows him. He knows the real David. He knows David at his core. He knows the good things. He knows the dreams. He knows the desires. He knows the future that he wants for him. And he knows it beyond all of these other things that so often we put up to protect ourselves from other people. You see, there's power in being known, and when we're known for truly who we are and what we are, we don't have to protect ourselves, because kind of like the chaff with wheat, we often build up barriers and walls and personas to protect ourselves from other people. Now, as David continues talking about being known in these first sections of verses in Psalm 139, he kind of shares some things that may sound troubling. He says that, no matter where I go, God, you know that I'm there. No matter what I think, no matter what I say, you know my thoughts, you know my words, you know where I come, you know where I go. God, you know all of those things. And for some of you, that kind of sounds like this Orwellian nightmare. It reminds you of the book 1984 and Big Brother. And because of that, you picture God as someone who's constantly watching you, as somebody who's just waiting for you to mess up, as somebody who knows you, but they use that knowledge as a source of conflict. Or they use that knowledge to control you, or they use that knowledge to critique you. You see, as David continues to reflect on what it means to be known by God, he doesn't pretend to understand how it works. Even in verse 6, he says, this knowledge is too wonderful and too lofty for me. And in simple terms, David is saying, this is simply above my pay grade. But as David continues to share his heart and reflect upon what it means to be known by God, he focuses on the times where he was found by God. You see, in verses 7 through 12, he focuses on the times where he was found in all of these different chapters and in all of these different circumstances. He writes that if he went up to the heavens, that God was there. That he went down to the depths of hell, that God was there. If he separated himself from the furthest away that he can possibly imagine from anything and anyone that he knows, God was there. And if he went down into the deepest, darkest pit of his entire life, God was there. You see, when we hear and reflect on what David is saying here, I think what he's sharing is being known by God isn't based in control. It's not just waiting to create conflict. It's not a knowledge that's actually going to be used to critique David later on. You see, no, this knowledge is based on something else. It's a knowledge based on care and compassion, because David was part of God's creation. You see, this is exactly what David reflects on in the next section of verses. And I want to take a moment and I just want to read those because the words are powerful. Here's what David writes. He says, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, God, because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, and I know that full well. My frame wasn't hidden from you when I was made. When I was woven together in the depths of the earth, your eyes saw my unformed body. And all of the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them ever came to be." You see, David, when he focuses on being found, we discover that God was there with David. No matter what chapter he was in his story, no matter what circumstances David was facing, God was present. And as we said last week, there's freedom in being found, but there's power in being known. Because being known by God isn't based on anything other than care and compassion for His creation. You know, The power of being known by God in this way is that we don't have to pretend with God. Now, David talks about this and he said, you have created my inmost being. You have knit me together, this idea that talks about precision and detail and a plan and a purpose and intentionality. He talks about that God knew him in his unformed way. Before David did anything that could be celebrated, before David loved anybody well, before David was loved poorly by another person, before there were any scars on his heart or on his mind or on his body because of what he experienced in the world, he was known by God. And you see, that's powerful. Because so often, you and I walk around in this world and we mold and shape ourselves to try to gain standing with other people. We mold and shape ourselves to try to gain position or power. But when we come before God, we don't have to pretend. You see, God knew David. He knew David at the very core of who he was. He knew the desires that David had for the future. He knew David's fears that he wouldn't tell anyone else. He knew David at the very root of who he was. And you know what that resulted in? That resulted in trust. Because usually, the people that we know the best and know us the best are the people that we usually trust the most. As I was reflecting upon this psalm, I discovered something powerful. That so far David has taken us on a journey. He's taken us from this idea that he's known by God and that he doesn't have to pretend, and God searches him and he knows him. And as David kind of contemplates that, or as he struggles or works his way through that, he ends up thinking and meditating and remembering all the times that God was there in his life. No matter what chapter, no matter what circumstances, God was there. And I think that helps him transition from this idea that God knows him to control him or critique him or to create conflict to understanding that God knows him and it's about care and compassion and creation. And as he journeys through all of that, David finally gets to a place where he trusts God. I think David trusted God before, but as this relationship continues, you see David starts to trust God more and more. And what we begin to see in verse 19 is that David stops pretending. See, in verses 19 through 22, when David discovers that he's known by God and it's based in care and compassion, he opens up to God. He shares something that I think he's kept hidden in his heart. I think he shares something that he's been afraid to say out loud. I think he was used to having to clean up his thoughts, or he was used to pretending, or he was used to adding pretense, or he was used to doing all these things with all of these other people. But when it comes to God, and when it comes to being known by God, and he doesn't have to pretend anymore, he just opens up and shares his fears. He shares the things that worry him. He shares his struggles. He shares his pain. He shares the thoughts, all of that, without cleaning it up, because he is known by God, and there is power in being known. Because he doesn't have to pretend. He doesn't have to add any pretense. And he's not chained, and when he has this conversation with God, to things he said or did in the past. He just opens up. You see, that's powerful. Because often you and I are used to building walls or barriers with other people. How powerful would it be for us to be able to talk openly with the God of the universe? To not have to worry about our thoughts, to not have to worry about cleaning it up because we're talking to God, to not have to worry about saying it correctly or saying it right or even having it all together. There's power when we can just come before God. And you know what? David begins to realize that power. Because in the very end, we read powerful verses. At the beginning, David was saying, yeah, I know by God, God has searched me and he knows me. But at the very end of this reflection of David, he begins to actually seek this out. He writes these words in verse 23. He says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts, and see if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." See, when David discovers that he's known by God, he wants to become known more deeply. You see, David likes that he doesn't have to pretend. He likes that he doesn't have to build walls or barriers with God. So now he asked God to search him. God, it's the same word as he used in the very beginning. God, I want you to separate and look at me. Look at the core of who I am. Beyond the exterior, beyond the surface, beyond all of these things that I do and say, trying to please other people. God, I want you to know me at the very depths of who I am. I want you to know my heart, and I want you to know my mind, and I want you to lead me to better places and to better things that you have always desired for me to have in my life. That was David's prayer. You know, as we begin the new year, maybe that should be our prayer as well. Our prayer that we can find and discover and embrace the freedom of being found by God. Wherever you find yourself today, no matter what circumstances you're facing, no matter what chapter of the story you're in, we have read last week and this week is that God is there. And that there's freedom when we are found by God. But as we begin this new year, it's not just about being found and having freedom from being found. We want to also embrace the power of being known by God. Truly known. Known for who we are. For who we want to become. So maybe you need to pray like David did. Maybe right now, what you need to do is you need to close your eyes for a second. And just still your soul. Maybe the best way to begin this new year is simply repeating or meditating on these words. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. And see if there is anything in my heart that shouldn't be there. And lead me somewhere better. See, there's freedom in being found by God. And there's power in being known by God. You know, maybe one of the most powerful things you can do is to stop pretending. Because God can't bless who you pretend to be. This quote from Bob Goff was powerful. It says, if you want to do something amazing for God, we need to trade the appearance of being close to Him for the power of actually being close to Him. As you begin this new year, I want you to understand that no matter where you find yourself, no matter what chapter of your story you're in, no matter what circumstances you're facing, that just like David, God is there. And that there's freedom in being found by God. But I also want you to realize that you are known by God. Known in a way that's based in care and compassion, because just like David, you were fearfully and wonderfully made. He knit you together with care and purpose and compassion. And He knows you, the real you. The you beneath all the scars that other people have left on you. The you that struggles with things that you don't want to struggle with anymore. The you that's maybe afraid to pursue your dreams. The you that's afraid to show yourself in front of other people because of what they may say, what they may think. He knows you. And that is powerful. Because maybe it's not just about who you know, it's about who you are known by. May God keep you And may He bless you. And may you walk in the freedom of being found. And may you walk in the power of being known this year.